At approximately 6:00 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, a convoy of unmarked federal vehicles breached the gates of the Montecito estate. This was not a social call, this was a raid. Eyewitnesses describe a scene of absolute chaos. The exclusive neighborhood of Montecito woke to something its wealthy residents had never experienced before. Sirens pierced the morning silence. Flashing lights reflected off high walls and manicured hedges. Neighbors who paid millions for privacy and discretion found themselves witnesses to a federal operation unfolding in real time. What many people don't know is what was actually happening behind those gates that morning. Agents wearing windbreakers with 3 bold letters across the back, FBI, moved with precision through the property. They weren't there to ask questions. They arrived with a federal search warrant, the kind that requires a judge to review evidence and determine there's probable cause of a crime. This isn't the paperwork you get for a simple tax dispute or accounting error. This is what you get when investigators believe a serious felony has been committed. The target was clear from the start. The Archwell Foundation, the charitable organization run by the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, had its headquarters registered to this very address. For months, financial analysts and charity oversight groups had been raising concerns. Donation numbers weren't adding up. Money seemed to be moving in ways that didn't match the foundation's public claims about helping communities and supporting humanitarian causes. On this particular occasion, federal authorities decided they had seen enough. The scene inside the estate was reportedly tense. Sources close to the situation quietly reveal that both Harry and Meghan were present when agents arrived. Imagine waking up to find your home surrounded, your private sanctuary suddenly transformed into an active crime scene. The couple who had spent years carefully crafting their public image as philanthropists and changemakers now faced investigators boxing up computers, seizing financial documents, and photographing everything. The specific trigger for this level of scrutiny centers on a missing sum: $6 million. That's not a rounding error. That's not a bookkeeping mistake you fix with an amended form. According to reports, this money was allegedly donated to Archwell, but has disappeared from official records without any clear trail showing where it actually went. Investigators want to know if that money ever reached the charitable projects it was supposed to fund, or if it ended up somewhere else entirely. Accounts from journalists and insiders reveal a consistent pattern of questions that have followed the Sussexes since they established their foundation. Where exactly does the money go? Why do some projects listed in annual reports seem impossible to verify? Why are there payments to consulting firms that appear to have no employees and no public presence? From this moment onward, nothing followed the usual script. Federal agents weren't just taking paper files. They were removing hard drives, laptops, and servers, the digital backbone of the entire operation. In the modern world, you can delete an email from your inbox, but forensic investigators can recover data that people thought was erased forever. If there are communications discussing how money was moved, how expenses were categorized, or how donations were handled, those messages are now in the hands of federal prosecutors. The raid lasted for hours. Boxes stacked up, agents photographed rooms. Every financial record, every piece of correspondence related to Archwell's operations was now evidence in what could become a major federal case. What became clear later was deeply unsettling. This wasn't a surprise inspection or a routine audit. The FBI doesn't mobilize this kind of operation based on suspicion alone. Legal experts point out that to get a warrant of this magnitude, investigators would need to present compelling evidence to a judge. They would need to show that a crime likely occurred and that evidence of that crime exists at the location they want to search. Someone gave them that evidence. The whispers in legal circles suggest a whistleblower came forward, a former employee, perhaps someone who saw the internal accounting and couldn't stay silent anymore. In white-collar crime investigations, insiders are often the key. They know where the bodies are buried, so to speak. They know which files to look at, which transactions don't make sense, which explanations were lies. Behind closed doors, the tone was far more serious than anyone outside realized. While the public knew the Sussexes as a couple trying to build a new life outside the royal family, investigators were looking at something completely different. They were examining whether a charitable foundation had been used as a personal piggy bank, whether donors who gave money thinking they were helping go. Odd causes had actually been funding a lifestyle instead. The neighborhood was in shock. Montecito is home to some of the wealthiest and most famous people in America. Privacy is the most valuable commodity. To have federal agents conducting a raid in broad daylight sends a message that no amount of money or fame puts you above the law. The brand is effectively dead the moment the yellow tape goes up. You can survive bad press, you can survive rumors and tabloid stories, but you cannot survive federal investigators walking out of your home with boxes of evidence. The image is too powerful, the implications are too serious. That brings us to the next development. What was in those boxes? What exactly were investigators looking for? And more importantly, what did they find? The FBI didn't show up at the Montecito estate on a hunch. They came armed with specific information, reportedly provided by someone who had worked inside the Archwell Foundation and knew exactly where the problems were buried. At that point in time, the situation was already fragile. Financial watchdogs had been circling for months. The annual reports published by Archwell looked impressive on the surface, glossy documents filled with inspiring language about global compassion and community uplift. But when analysts tried to verify the actual projects, they hit walls. Some initiatives mentioned in the report seemed to exist only on paper. Others had vague descriptions that made it impossible to track where money actually went. This context matters for what happened afterward. The core issue centers on what investigators are calling phantom projects. These are programs that appear in official filings, complete with impressive names and ambitious goals, but seem to lack any real-world footprint. No staff, no office space, no trail of actual work being done. One transaction in particular caught the attention of federal investigators, a transfer of $2 million to an entity called Arch Global Consulting. According to Archwell's books, this payment was for strategic philanthropic advising. But here's where the story gets complicated. Arch Global Consulting doesn't appear to have employees. It doesn't have a website or a public office. Its registered address traces back to a mail drop in Delaware, a state known for allowing businesses to operate with minimal transparency. When investigators tried to find out who actually received that $2 million, the trail went cold. What many people don't know is what was discussed privately about these transactions. Sources close to the investigation suggest that some of these shell companies may have connections to people in the Sussex's inner circle, family members, close associates, people who could receive money without the public ever knowing about it. If that's true, it would represent a classic pattern seen in charity fraud cases. Donations come in tax-free, then get paid out as consulting fees to entities controlled by the very people running the foundation. This is called self-dealing, and it's illegal. Multiple reports point toward the same conclusion. Archwell may have been structured not primarily as a charity, but as a way to funnel money to personal expenses while maintaining the appearance of humanitarian work. The private jets could be billed as site visits. The designer wardrobes could be categorized as event costumes. The security teams could be listed as program expenses. On paper, everything looks legitimate, but in reality, the charity exists to support a lifestyle. The evidence seized during the raid will tell the full story. Investigators reportedly took laptops that had been stored in a safe, suggesting these weren't the computers used for everyday foundation work. These were the devices that contained sensitive information important enough to lock away. Those briefed on the matter say concerns were immediate when agents accessed the encrypted files. Financial forensics is a specialized field. Experts can trace every dollar that moves through a bank account. They can see when money comes in as a donation, watch it get transferred to a consulting firm, and then track it as it moves again into personal accounts. If the pattern exists, it will show up in the data. And the data doesn't lie. The lifestyle question has always been the elephant in the room. How do Harry and Meghan afford their life? The Montecito mansion alone requires enormous upkeep. Security costs run into the millions annually. Private travel, staff salaries, wardrobe, entertainment. It all adds up to expenses that their known income sources simply don't cover. The Spotify deal ended badly. The Netflix contract produces some revenue, but not enough to sustain this level of spending. Book royalties eventually dry up, so where does the money come from? Many are now questioning how this was allowed to happen for so long. Charity regulators have oversight responsibilities. The IRS reviews NOMP. Profit tax filings. State attorneys general monitor foundations operating in their jurisdictions. Yet somehow, Archwell operated for years with financial discrepancies that are only now triggering serious investigation. Part of the answer may lie in who the Sussexes are, former royals with global name recognition and powerful friends. People are often hesitant to scrutinize celebrities and public figures too closely, especially when those figures have cultivated an image of doing good work. But the FBI doesn't care about fame. They care about whether the law was broken, and if donations meant for charity ended up paying for private jets and personal expenses, that's wire fraud. It's embezzlement. And because the money crossed state lines, moving from California to Delaware and potentially overseas, it falls under federal jurisdiction. The whistleblower who came forward understood this. They knew that staying silent would eventually make them complicit, so they walked into a federal building with documents, with files, with evidence. And this is where the narrative shifts. The raid wasn't the beginning of the investigation, it was the culmination. The morning of the raid, agents knew exactly what they were looking for. This wasn't a fishing expedition. Federal law enforcement had been building a case for months, quietly gathering evidence, interviewing former employees, and tracing financial transactions through multiple accounts and entities. Let's take a moment to understand what actually unfolded in the weeks before that convoy arrived in Montecito. A former high-ranking executive within the Archwell Foundation had resigned several months earlier. At the time, the departure was explained away as a mutual decision, the kind of vague corporate speak that means absolutely nothing. But behind closed doors, the tone was far more serious. This individual, referred to in legal circles as the accountant, didn't just walk away from a bad job. They walked straight into an FBI field office with a flash drive containing what investigators would later call the shadow ledger. What many people don't know is what was discussed privately in those foundation offices. When you run a charity that's publicly clean but privately dirty, you typically keep two sets of books. One set shows what you report to the IRS, neat categories, appropriate expenses, everything by the rules. The other set shows what actually happened, where the money really went, who really got paid, and what the payments were actually for. The accountant reportedly brought both. According to leaked information from the investigation, the shadow ledger contained notes next to certain transactions. One entry allegedly read H&M Personal PR Crisis Fund. Another simply said Doria Allowance. If these entries are real and can be authenticated, they demolish any defense of innocent mistakes or sloppy bookkeeping. This was intentional. This was structured. Sources close to the situation quietly reveal that the accountant didn't make this decision lightly. They had signed non-disclosure agreements like all Archwell employees. But here's the critical legal point. An NDA cannot be used to cover up a crime. If you witness illegal activity, no contract in the world can force you to stay silent. The accountant understood this. They also understood that if the foundation eventually collapsed under its own fraud, everyone associated with it could face charges. Cooperation was the only path to immunity. From this moment onward, nothing followed the usual script for the Sussexes. The FBI began quietly verifying the whistleblower's information. They traced wire transfers to shell companies in Delaware and Wyoming, states that make it easy to hide the true owners of business entities. They found LLCs with no employees, no offices, no websites, just bank accounts that received large sums from Archwell and then moved that money elsewhere. One company in particular drew scrutiny. Arch Global Consulting received $2 million for strategic philanthropic advising, but when investigators tried to find evidence of any actual work performed, they found nothing. No reports, no emails detailing advice given, no meetings on calendars. Just a payment of $2 million to a ghost. Observers noted a sharp shift in strategy when the FBI brought in IRS Criminal Investigation Division. This is the unit that handles tax fraud cases. Their involvement suggested investigators weren't just looking at charity fraud, they were building a tax evasion case as well. Here's how that works. If you use charity money for personal expenses and don't report it as income, you've committed tax fraud. Every private jet flight billed to the foundation but used for personal travel. Every designer dress purchased with charity funds. Every security payment that protected your private life rather than a charitable event. If it wasn't properly declared as income, it's tax evasion. The IRS doesn't need to prove you stole from charity. They just need to prove you didn't pay taxes on money you received. It's how they took down Al Capone. It's how they take down a lot of people who think they're too smart to get caught. The situation escalated faster than expected once the warrant was approved. Federal judges don't sign search warrants casually. The FBI had to present evidence showing probable cause that crimes were committed and that evidence of those crimes existed at the Montecito property. They had to show the whistleblower was credible. They had to demonstrate that the financial irregularities were serious enough to justify a raid. They cleared that bar. The morning of the operation, agents arrived with a detailed list of what to seize. They knew which rooms contained home offices. They knew where the foundation's servers were located. They knew about the laptops in the safe. An insider later described the atmosphere as tense and silent. Meghan reportedly demanded to see the warrant immediately and insisted on calling her attorneys. Harry, according to witnesses, seemed stunned. He sat in the living room as federal agents systematically went through the house, photographing documents, boxing up hard drives, and cataloging everything they took. The neighbors watched through windows and from driveways. In a community where privacy is sacred, this was the ultimate scandal. Federal agents don't raid homes in Montecito. That just doesn't happen in neighborhoods where Oprah and Ellen live. But it happened. The full implications may only now be emerging. Because the raid itself was just one day, the investigation that follows will take months, possibly years, and everything seized in those boxes will be analyzed by forensic accountants and federal prosecutors looking for evidence of fraud. What followed remains largely unexplored by the public. But inside the Department of Justice, the case is just beginning. The legal reality facing the Duke and Duchess of Sussex is far more serious than most people realize. Federal prosecutors don't build cases like this unless they believe they can win in court. Let's talk about what really happened in the days after the raid. The silence from the Sussex camp was immediate and total. Usually within hours of any negative story, their PR team releases statements. Friendly journalists publish supportive pieces. The online fan base mobilizes with hashtags and coordinated messaging, but this time nothing. Because what do you say when the FBI has just carried boxes of evidence out of your home? You can't claim it's a misunderstanding. You can't blame the media for making things up. Federal search warrants are public record. The raid happened. The evidence was seized. Those are facts that no PR strategy can spin away. At first glance, this didn't seem like a situation anyone could walk back. Legal experts familiar with white-collar crime cases point out that the charges potentially in play carry serious consequences. Wire fraud, moving money across state lines with intent to deceive, carries up to 20 years in federal prison per count. If prosecutors charge each fraudulent transaction as a separate count, the potential sentence adds up quickly. Then there's tax evasion. If the couple used charity money for personal expenses and didn't report it as income, that's a separate set of federal charges. The IRS Criminal Investigation Division doesn't get involved in cases unless the numbers are substantial and the evidence is strong. This moment came after weeks of quiet tension that most people never saw. Former employees of the Archwell Foundation have been contacted by investigators. Some have been asked to come in for interviews. Others have been subpoenaed to provide documents. The turnover rate at the foundation has been extremely high, staff members leaving after short tenures, many unwilling to speak publicly about their experiences. But in private conversations with federal agents, they don't need to worry about NDAs or reputation. They can tell the truth about what they saw, how expenses were categorized, which purchases were questionable, who made the decisions about where money went. Each interview adds another piece to the puzzle. The financial forensics are equally damning. Investigators have now had weeks to analyze the seized hard drives and servers. Forensic accountants can track money through multiple accounts, across different states, even into offshore entities. They can see when donations came into Archwell, watch those funds get transferred to shell companies, and then trace the final destination. If the money ended up in personal accounts, the case is effectively over. What became clear later was deeply unsettling for anyone who donated to the foundation. Ordinary people who gave $20 or $50 believing they were helping causes they cared about. Wealthy donors who wrote checks for thousands thinking they were supporting legitimate humanitarian work. Corporations that partnered with Archwell, assuming the foundation operated with transparency and integrity. If the investigation proves that money was diverted for personal use, all of those donors become victims in a federal fraud case. Multiple reports point toward the same conclusion about what happens next. The Department of Justice will likely present evidence to a grand jury. This is a group of citizens who hear testimony and review documents to determine if there's enough evidence to issue an indictment. Grand jury proceedings are secret, but they're also one-sided. Only the prosecution presents its case. If the evidence is as strong as leaked information suggests, an indictment is almost certain. And that's when everything changes. An indictment means formal criminal charges. It means arraignment in federal court. It means bail hearings and conditions of release. For Prince Harry, who is in the United States on a visa, it means potential immigration consequences. Non-citizens convicted of crimes involving fraud or moral turpitude can be deported. The fairy tale of building a new life in California could end with forced removal from the country. Many are now questioning how this was allowed to happen in the first place. The Sussexes had access to top-tier legal and financial advice. They could have hired the best accountants, the most experienced nonprofit administrators, the most careful compliance officers. They could have run Archwell with complete transparency, knowing that their high profile meant extra scrutiny. Instead, according to the investigation's findings so far, they allegedly chose a different path: complexity instead of transparency, shell companies instead of straightforward accounting, vague project descriptions instead of clear documentation. It remains unclear why they believed this approach would work indefinitely. Perhaps they thought their celebrity status provided immunity. Perhaps they assumed no one would dare challenge a prince and a duchess. Perhaps they genuinely believed they were entitled to use charity money however they saw fit. Whatever the reasoning, the FBI has made it clear that fame doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is whether the law was broken. Only later did the true impact become apparent for their reputation and their future. The brand they spent years building, the humanitarian couple fighting for social justice, has been replaced overnight with a very different image: federal suspects, potential fraudsters, people who allegedly took money meant for charity and used it for themselves. But this was far from the end of the story. The legal process is just beginning. The full truth has yet to emerge in a courtroom, and the consequences, both legal and personal, will unfold in the months and years to come.